Welcome to Dad Talk Today. The podcast for dads facing some of the toughest moments of their lives. We are here to walk with men through divorce, keep them connected to their kids, help them understand their rights, and work for change in family law courts. Moms, you are always welcome too. We are all about advocating for shared parenting and doing what is best for our kids. Here is your host, Eric Carroll.
Today, and we talk about the struggles that fathers like John go through. We stand with the underdogs. We stand with the ones that are fighting to be in their family's life. And today we are here, standing beside our brother Tom. If I could say anything to those kids, I want you to know that your daddy loves you more than anything. And he fought for you. He fought for you so hard. We talk about how parental alienation, not being able to see your children, is like grieving the loss of a living child. And that's very true. There's a child here that you can have a relationship with, but you're not being allowed because of family law courts or profits that they want to make. But today there's another angle. We're here grieving the loss of one of our brothers.
Like he said in the letters, I'm fighting for you. He wanted so much to hold you, to hug you, to kiss you, to play with you, to love you. And he was denied that.
I can tell you this father fought with everything that he had. Everything. And we're not going to let his memory die. Would you stand with us for this moment of silence? As we stand with John.
We are going to do all we can to let them know how much their daddy loved them.
We stand with John.
Hey everybody, welcome to Dad Talk Today. We're coming off a pretty emotional weekend. I am joined with attorney Kevin Hickey. He was one of the lawyers that was on John's case. What's going on, Kevin?
Hey man, how's it going?
Going good. So guys, we're going to try to fill in some of the gaps. I know there's been a lot of questions coming in. Been trying to be very careful on what we say. This is a very personal time, and remember, this is still very, very fresh for the family. So, I think there might be some questions we can't get to. I'll let Kevin speak to that.
I want to say a couple of things first. I've heard a lot about, I was one of John's attorneys, and that's very, very true. My co-counsel was Tom Jackson out of Bismarck, North Dakota. And I really enjoyed working with Tom. The two days of trial that I was involved in, we were very happy with how those 2 days went. And I don't know that we would have changed much. We scored a lot of points, as we say, on those days. But Tom Jackson was right there with me. I was lead counsel, but he was co-counsel right there with me the whole way. And I just want to let everybody know that. My purpose tonight, and I think Eric, you and I have talked a lot about this, is to talk about John's kind of the backstory and the case that happened, his divorce and custody case. And that's my purpose tonight, is to clear up any misinformation or falsehoods or just flat out lies about John and about his case, and get the truth out there. He deserves that, and his family deserves that, and that's my goal tonight. I know we're probably going to get questions about the children, and as Eric said earlier, there's very, very little we can say, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But there's very little we can say. I can tell you that when something like this happens, it is very common for CPS to check on children and to interview them. And And that did happen here. So as far as we know, the children are with mom, and they were interviewed by CPS. That's about all I've got as far as preliminary stuff, Eric.
Gotcha. Kevin, I think it would be good for us to kind of start near the beginning when you came onto this case. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what the scenario was looking like when you signed on?
I got in the case, it would have been early last year, 2020. John's divorce case and the custody was part of that, was about a 4 to 5 day trial. And the first 2 to 3 days were in the fall of 2019 before I was involved. Tom Jackson was his attorney at that time. And I handle a lot of high conflict custody cases and take those across the country. And I'm brought in many times as co-counsel on those cases to work alongside the local attorney. And that's what happened here. I was contacted by John, and he hired me to come in and work with Tom Jackson. That was around early 2020. And so we had 2 days of trial left when I got involved.
Right. So we all know that John had faced these false allegations. I guess you could talk to how common that can be inside the family law courts and some of the obstacles that John went through to prove his innocence. Guys, I mean, he proved his innocence in every way that you possibly could, and he went to to get justice in the family law court system. And I don't know, I'll let you speak to that, Kevin.
Well, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I spoke with Tom Jackson briefly today, and we agreed that John's case is now over. The divorce and custody case is over, and it's been over for a while. And we agreed that it would be okay to talk about things that were on the record, and maybe pleadings that were put into the court clerk's record. As far as what John did to clear his name, I think I need to back up to the first incident and really led to the two of them, to he and Rebecca, separating. It was called the Basil restaurant incident. It was in around November of 2017, and Rebecca alleged that John grabbed her pretty violently by the arm and injured her shoulder, and then that injury and the damage from that persisted for a long, long time after that. She filed for a restraining order against John, and it was granted. Now, I want you to put a pin in that, because ultimately the fact situation that resulted in that kind of came under question. John and his attorney tried to get the video from the Basil restaurant there in Williston, North Dakota, prior to the restraining order hearing, and they were not able to get it. Fast forward to May of 2018, when the divorce hearing is going, the first what we call temporary hearings, they're called interim hearings in North Dakota. When that hearing was held, John and his attorney had obtained the video and played it for the judge. And the judge, in his order from that hearing, stated that it was obvious that there was no abuse by John during that incident, and also stated that Rebecca's credibility was seriously in question. She had also, at that temporary hearing, tried to fabricate some other past alleged abuse by John, and the judge said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's in his order that was filed, her credibility was very damaged during that hearing, and he really doubts that anything like that happened in the past. And after that interim hearing, John obtained temporary custody of the children. The other things that he did, because then there were other abuse allegations after that about John abusing his children. When that happens, you are immediately on the defensive, and you're immediately guilty. We have innocent until proven guilty. When that bomb is dropped in your case, you are guilty until you can prove your innocence. And so you have to start, as the attorney and as the client, you have to start proving your innocence. So we had John, this was before I got in the case. He took a polygraph test regarding the abuse allegations against his children. He passed that with flying colors. He also took what's called a psychosexual assessment, and he did that with Dr. Ed Connor, who is one of the premier psychologists in the country that administers psychosexual assessments. And he passed that with flying colors. And there's a portion of that test, and Dr. Connor can explain this so well, so much better than me, but there's a portion of that test that indicates deception, whether the subject is essentially lying or trying to minimize what happened. And John had an extremely low score on that portion of the test. So he passed the psychosexual examination with flying colors. And that test, in addition to the deception, it tests for the person's inclination to be a pedophile, to touch children that are either in puberty or prepubescent. Are they inclined to touch their own children? John scored so low on all of those scores. There is just no way that he ever did anything to these children.
Yeah, man, and that's, we interviewed a lot of people while, sorry, my camera went out. We interviewed a lot of people while we were up there, and they all said the same thing. Everybody that knew John said there is no way he could have been responsible for doing something like that. It just didn't fit his character. And the little bit that I talked to John, I could just tell what kind of person I was talking to. I was just fumbling through one of the last messages. I interviewed John back at Thanksgiving just a few months ago, guys, and to have to stand over his casket knowing what happened, it was one of the most surreal things I've ever been through. But John said, when we were talking this morning, you mentioned it's the holiday season, and you talked about last year getting phone calls from fathers being served with protection orders. I pretty much forgot about it by now, but it was Thanksgiving Eve 2017 when I got my first protection order served. I was just thinking, he had been exonerated back in May, and then here it was Thanksgiving. He's on the show with me, still not with his kids. I mean, had you ever saw something like this where it took that long just to get a hearing for someone to get their kids back?
It can happen. It's rare, but it can happen. And before we leave the restraining order issue, it came out during the trial that Rebecca had filed for 3 that we know of, at least 3 more restraining orders in Idaho. And all of those were dismissed. And she admitted that on the stand. So, and I have not been able to get the records, but it's my understanding that she filed for yet another one last Friday, the day that John was killed. I believe that was in her father's affidavit that this portions of that have been made public. And that was dismissed. That was dismissed the same day it was filed.
What was going through your head when you heard about this? I mean, you guys worked so hard on this case to get him exonerated. And then I think the news kind of shook all of us, a couple weekends ago. I mean, what was going through your head?
Well, it was very tough because we had the final 2 days of trial were in May of last year, and the judge did not issue his ruling until December. I will tell you, in over 20 years of practicing, I've never had a judge, especially on a divorce and custody order, wait that long. I don't know what the issue was. I don't know if COVID was involved, but that was way too long. And I talked with Tom Jackson in North Dakota if that was common, and he said absolutely not. They're usually much sooner. The reason I'm telling you that is John's frustration throughout that time was just growing and growing. You can imagine 6 months of waiting. It's like you just turned in your test paper and you're waiting on your score, and you have to wait months and months and months. He wanted to see his kids. He wanted custody, and he needed to see what this judge was going to do. So his frustration and his angst I think, was growing and growing. So in December, the ruling comes down that gives him unsupervised time with his children starting in February 1st. So I knew all of that. And of course, Tom Jackson knew all of that leading up to that time. So I was, as the attorney, thinking this is going to be good. He's going to start getting to see his children. You know, that stress can start to maybe go down. And so I got a message that morning that something had happened to him. And I immediately called Tom Jackson. And when Tom answered the phone, I could just tell by his voice that it was true. And he told me, he didn't know how to tell me, but John had been killed. And I was angry. I was mad. I was sick to my stomach. I think what everybody felt. And it was sickening. It was absolutely sickening. And I've gone back and forth these past several days, I think just like everybody, just between anger and weeping and because it was such an injustice, just such an injustice.
It is, man, and it's hard because the more you try to make sense out of it, the less sense that it makes. And this should not have happened for a father that went to such lengths just to be with his children. I don't get it, and I want to say a shout out to Tom. I know Tom's not really a media person, but guys, I shared a phone call with him a couple of days after this happened, and the guy couldn't even speak.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this really rocked so many people, and hearing that pain, it was hard because he said, Eric, I never knew I'd work so hard to prove an innocence for a client, and then something like this happens.
Eric, you talked about John's devotion to his children. I want to back up to that Basil restaurant incident in November and December of 2017.
Yeah.
After Rebecca got the restraining order granted, she fled to Idaho, where her parents lived, with the children. Now, John was still in Williston, North Dakota, and his understanding was she was just going to visit and coming back. Well, she never came back. And she, of course, didn't tell him that. Once he got some visitations set up, eventually, and it was quite a while, he went months after that without even seeing his kids. But once it was finally set up, it was set up in Idaho, and he had to go see them at a visitation center. So he would drive 13 hours at the end of working all week. He would drive 13 hours to see his children for just a few hours and then turn around and go back home. And he did that over and over and over. And the man loved his children.
Right. And I can tell you that wasn't an easy 13-hour drive because we did it.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you guys, there is one gas station every 250, 300 miles, and if you don't get it there, you're not getting it anywhere. There's no fast food places, nothing, and the roads were horrible. It was beautiful, but, just the weather conditions around there is something we wasn't used to, so thinking about those long rides that he was doing back and forth, man, it just shows you how much this father loved his children. Had him on back in November. He talked about those journals that he wrote for his kids. We got to see those at the funeral. And for anybody that could have read those, you can just feel the pain in the words that he had put down in those papers. It's
well, he was talking to them. That was, if they're not going to be here with me, then I'm going to write down what I would be saying to them and talk. That was his way of talking to them.
Right.
And that's all he could do. And it's heartbreaking.
It really is. I was watching one of his videos that he had on his Facebook where he was saying, here's your Christmas presents that got sent back to me. And here's the letters that I wrote for you. No parent should have to go through that.
No.
Yeah.
I remember when he got the temporary order entered, it was around August of 2018, and he got them. And I believe it was at that time they opened Christmas presents from months and months earlier because he wasn't able to see them. So they had Christmas around August of 2018.
We got a few questions coming in. Give me 1 second. They're going so quick. It's pushing it on up. John Strimmel said, Kevin, are you able to testify to John's character in the criminal trial against this killer, does attorney-client privilege apply? Thank you.
You know, that's a very good question. I haven't even thought about that. I'd probably have to confer with my attorney, Tom Jackson, on that. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. But if I'm asked, I will be there. I can tell you that.
All right. Scott McDowell said, according to John, he won custody initially. The allegations were never brought up by his ex until after he won custody. If the allegations were real, why didn't she bring them up during the initial custody hearing? It's obviously false. So John initially won custody?
Scott, that is an excellent question, and that is a point that I brought up. We had to file a pretty extensive brief at the end of the case, and that's a point that I brought up, that the initial, first of all, Rebecca tried to file for the divorce in Idaho after she got over there, and John filed in North Dakota where they had been living. The judge from North Dakota and the judge from Idaho conferred and decided that North Dakota had jurisdiction. So the Idaho divorce was dismissed. But there was this initial temporary hearing early in, around May of 2018. John was there with his attorney, and Rebecca showed up pro se. She did not have an attorney, even though she knew that hearing was coming up. That was a red flag for me, almost like she wasn't taking it seriously, or she thought she was going to win. I don't know what was in her mind. But throughout that whole hearing, she talked about things that had happened to her, and that she felt like was abuse towards her. But the children had already been interviewed 2 or 3 months before. And there were questions about some of the things they said, and whether they were actual outcries or allegations against John that there had been sexual abuse. She knew that, but none of that information was brought up at the initial custody hearing. So that's a real good question, because that was a big red flag for me. If that's going on and you truly believe it, why are you not bringing it up at that time?
Got another question from Winford. They said, why did it take so long to see his kids?
There were a lot of reasons for that, and I do not have the time frames in my mind, because you go over about a 2 or 3 year period. When Rebecca first took off to Idaho in December of 17, remember, John for a few weeks thought she was just going to be there and then come back. He then figured out she wasn't coming back, so he had to file for divorce. And I think he filed at the end of January or sometime in February of 18. Well, she filed as well in Idaho. They were supposed to have an interim hearing, temporary hearing, in March or so, I think. I think it got moved to May. Well, she's in Idaho and he's in North Dakota. And if I recall, he did try to go there, and she would not let him see the children. So then he has this hearing in May, hopefully getting to see them. That order's not entered until August. So there's several more months of him not seeing them. So when he gets them in August and he gets granted temporary custody, the judge gave him temporary custody, found that Rebecca was not credible, and gave him temporary custody. That was in August, and he only had him about 7 or 8 days before Rebecca started burning up the phones to CPS in North Dakota and got them to open a juvenile case, which then trumps the divorce case, and the children were immediately taken from John while that was investigated. And I really can't get into the juvenile case, but I think it's important to understand that timeline, that's what happened. A juvenile case was opened and the children were taken out of the home. And then it was months and months of back and forth and hours here and there of supervised visitation.
Gotcha. We got a pretty popular question. This one's being asked quite a bit. You might be able to answer some, you might not. So I'm just going to bring it to you. Dad Surviving Divorce on YouTube said, will the mother have some accountability in this, or will the father-in-law be the only one going through this?
I can't answer that.
All right, guys. So that's a question. Just hold off. Jeff Morgan on YouTube said, in general, are judges inclined to rule against the father with a protection order filed against him?
Well, it depends on what you mean by rule. many times a divorce will start, and if there's a contentious custody situation, there will be some kind of protective order that's filed. And so if you're representing the person that the protective order is against, you're kind of fighting that from the very beginnings. And also many times the divorce case will be moved over to the court with the judge that did the protective order, so the judge is aware of it. I think it's definitely a factor that the judge takes into consideration. Eric, I want to go back to the question on about the case against the father-in-law and possibly mom and all that. The Mast family put out a statement yesterday. The family has been they've had a lot, obviously, to deal with the last several days. They've met with the prosecutors and the detectives. The prosecutors and detectives have opened their doors and their phones to them 24/7. And so they can call and talk with them anytime, and they've kept them updated.
Absolutely. I think John would have wanted us to touch on this. I'm going to try not to get too many of these in here, but you're finding a lot of people that are going through similar situations to John, and they're asking some questions. So I'll bring a few of those to you, Kevin. Andres Perez said, "I've been alienated from my son for 2 years. What do I have to do to be able to see my son if the mother has threatened me that if I come by, she will invent things on me to put me in prison?"
It's not about what the truth is. It's about what you can prove in court. So any way that you can keep a text, an email, a photo, a recording, anything you can do to provide separate evidence from your own testimony as to what happened, you have to start gathering that and make sure you get it to your attorney so they can help you. Your attorney can only work with the evidence that you give them or they get from the other side. So make sure you keep a record of those things happening.
Claire Bowles said, "Is it even legal for a lifetime restraining order to be implemented? And what if the kids still meet with the parent with the RO against them? Could the RO be rescinded based on that?"
Now, restraining orders can be entered for just the parent, or they can be entered for just the children, or they can be entered for the parent and the children. So it depends on what the restraining order says as to whether it's a violation if you've got the children around or not. A lifetime restraining order, I'm sure, is possible, especially if there's some kind of criminal case attached to it. Normally, at least in Arkansas, where I practice most of the time, is 1 or 2 years.
And so this is just kind of a hypothetical right here. Vital Limits on YouTube said, "If the shoe were on the other foot and the mother was the one accused, would she likely have been treated the same?"
Well, I think it depends on the personality of the other parent. I don't know if she's asking specifically about John Mast. Is that what she's asking about?
I'm not too sure. I think so. I think
what?
so.
I'll address that. There was a guardian ad litem that was appointed for the children that testified in court, and she testified that in her meetings with John, he never said one negative word about the mother. When he interviewed the mom, it was the polar opposite, and we put this in our brief as well. The longer she told stories about what he allegedly did to her, the more fanciful and the more, at least what the ad litem felt, fabricated the story became. And she also felt that the mom and the family talked negatively about John around the children, and that was very unhealthy. So after she met with both parents, those were her impression.
And I can back that up, because when I spoke to John, he never said a bad word about his ex-wife, never. And everybody we interviewed over the past weekend said the same thing, guys. They said John never spoke an ill word towards her. When he talked to me, he thought it was the family law courts that had broke up their marriage. I mean, this was a guy that had amazing character, because if I had been in his shoes, I don't know that I could have had the temperament that John had. I mean, he really showed respect towards his kid's mother, and it's just a shame, man. It really is. Luke Forth said, more importantly, any news from the judge?
The judge in the divorce case.
Yep.
We filed a motion, and by we I mean Tom, filed a motion last week advising what happened and that the case probably needed to just be over with. It was pretty much over with. The divorce had already been granted at that point. There were a couple of lingering visitation issues, but I've not heard from the judge. I don't know that would be a normal thing to hear from him, but he's been notified of what's happened.
And we actually went to the courthouse the other day and tried to talk to him. Unfortunately, he was not there, but we did go by, and I don't know that there's much they can say right now until other things go on, guys. So
yeah, I don't think you would hear anything.
No. Brandy Roar Johnson said, North Dakota court seemed to take forever prior to COVID. I filed a motion to modify custody fall of 2017. Finally in the courtroom in May 2018, extended to June 2018. October judge denied a motion but asked for a new parenting plan by both parents by November 30th. We submit ours. The other party did not until 3 days after it was due. There is still no knee order signed. Current attorney had not filed anything more because the case still looks open. Is this normal?
Oh boy, all I can tell you is every case is different. That's a lot of information. There are 100 different reasons why cases get delayed. So whether that's normal or not, I can't say.
Got another common one because I think this has been brought up a good bit when it comes to John's case. AJ Brout said, why with all the failed protection orders, why they would meet in an unmonitored store parking lot and not a camera having police department?
I'm a little hesitant to answer that, but I can tell you this. John had his brother and sister with him, and it was a public parking lot. Clearly, he did not anticipate what happened that was going to happen. I think if there had been, I know John, and if he'd have had any indication that something was going to escalate to that level, he absolutely would have done it at the police department. He was not doing it just from not considering all the factors. I think he thought it would be okay by having his brother and his sister there.
Well, you got to think too, Kevin. I mean, how long had it been since he's seen his kids? He got the news earlier that day. I'm a daddy that wants to see my kids. He was excited. Those details was probably secondary. All he was thinking of at that point in time, guys, is I'm going to get to see my babies. Nobody could foresee something like this ever happening. And,
hindsight's always 20/20.
It is. It's easy to look back and say I would have done this, but I mean, all of us, make mistakes from time to time, guys. So I think this should be a learning thing for anybody that's been through situations like this. Take the situation, what we've seen happen, and try to base it around your best knowledge of what you need to do in your cases.
Yeah.
Vital Limits on YouTube said, what's going on with his kids now? They have grandparents, aunts, etc. Is there something in motion for them to see John's family? And has anyone heard any kind of remarks from the mother?
I have not heard any remarks from the mother. I don't think the family has. I think the best way to answer that is the family is looking at this as the number one priority is safety. And this took everyone was shocked by what happened. And it's still very fresh and very new. And, there was a question I saw previously about, did they come to the funeral? And the children did not come to the funeral. The family felt it best for safety reasons to not even attempt to do that. And I think that kind of goes to the question that was just asked. It's still, there's just a lot of factors there.
Absolutely. Kathy Detweiler said, do John's parents have visitation with the kids now?
No, that's kind of goes to what I was just talking about.
Yeah. Rich Dallas on Facebook said, what more can we do to prevent this from repeating to another father?
That's Eric might be able to add in a lot there too. I don't. There's a lot. You've got to look at legislation. You've got to look at, well, let me just kind of go to, I think, the heart of that question. Something like this happening, a parent being killed or hurt, or some kind of physical altercation. Judges do not like, unless it's absolutely necessary, to have visitation exchanges at police stations. They don't like children having to get used to that. But sometimes it's necessary. And again, I think if John had felt there was a danger of something like this, that's probably what he would have done. But other than meeting at police stations, I don't know how much else you can really do.
I will add to that, Kevin. I think, we was talking a little bit before we got on here. We've been doing this for a year and a half now, and we ask for people's, participation all the time. And we've been going around talking to politicians, doing everything we can do to bring some type of awareness as to what's going on. Even John came on here to tell his story. And when this happened, it seemed like everybody was affected and came, and they're wanting to get involved. Guys, we need you involved before stuff like this happens. If I could say anything to you, John's case needs to be a wake-up call. This doesn't need to be something that just shows up and it's a story, and then the next story comes by, and then that's when people get involved. We need you to get actively involved now. We're making that documentary not to be making a documentary, but so we can show our legislators, judges, attorneys, what is going on with parental alienation, and we can educate the public, because this is happening. Unfortunately, I've heard from many people, Kevin, that this has happened to, that I didn't know about, this same situation, and it's going to keep repeating itself. It's going to, it's just the way it goes. We need you guys to get involved, be in here, find some way that you can be proactive, and it's about all I can say. I wish we had a handbook to where we can say you need to do X, Y, and Z. We don't, but that's why you got to get in here and get involved. You'll make mistakes along the way, but guys, it's a lot of hard work. It is, and I mean, just seeing what John had to go through to see his kids, it's that should be enough to make anybody want to say enough is enough.
It is, and there's another part to this from an attorney and legal and trial standpoint that I want to mention. The research is very clear that in custody and divorce cases, when there's a contentious custody case and all of a sudden sexual abuse allegations come out against the children, and this is research, this is just not my opinion, the vast majority of those allegations are false. Now, that doesn't mean that the children were lying or whatever, or they were coached. It's just that whatever they're saying happened did not happen. Now, there's real allegations out there too. No one's saying there's not. But you really have to look at these with very carefully when there's a custody and a divorce situation going on. Now, you're the judge in this case, and you're looking at all this stuff. It's very hard for judges. They know a lot of these allegations, and the majority of them, when they come out of a contentious custody case, are not true as well. But they're having to sit and listen to all of this, and it's very hard to discern what happened, what was said. How you fix that, I don't know. All you can do is a lot of the things that John did to try to prove your innocence. That's all. For now, that's all we can really do.
Absolutely. Dad Surviving Door said, do you think in these situations the mothers are coached to call CPS and do these things? How did she know that CPS would trump the temporary custody order?
The second part of the question, I'm not sure, but when you bring that bomb out and use it of those kinds of allegations, most people know that's going to get a lot of attention. And I think this is just my opinion, speculation. She knew exactly what would happen. I think there are a bunch of different reasons why a parent You're saying a mom, why a mom would do that, but it all kind of comes down to just winning at all costs. And I think that's what happened here.
Absolutely. John Blinkhorn said, thanks. Gathering of evidence. Do you recommend any kind of recording equipment? Should all transactions and visits be recorded?
You need to talk to your attorney in your state. Every state has different rules about recording, so you need to really look at that. As far as the visitations, if there have been problems, I don't like having to bring cameras to visitation exchanges. It puts everybody on the defensive. But if you've been having problems with your visitation exchange, absolutely. John had his brother and sister there, not so much for protection, but to just video the visitation exchange, because he didn't know what to expect. And he didn't know if she would be argumentative or how it would go. And so he wanted to capture what happened in case he needed that for court.
Absolutely. That's not. Winford said, what custody rights did John get once the divorce was settled?
He got joint custody as far as decision making. He had equal decision making over the children with Rebecca. The primary residential custody, where they would be most of the time, would be with her. That was very disappointing for us and clearly very disappointing for John. But he had supervised visitation up until then, and the judge was giving him unsupervised visitation starting February 1st. So that was a big deal. I was worried there was going to be a longer, what we call step-up time before he got unsupervised visitation. So that's what he got.
I think it's important for us to address too, Kevin. I've got a lot in the comments, and people of what they feel happened. I think we was reading an article the other day that was talking about the mother's involvement, and nobody knows what that is. And I think it's important. I understand that everybody is very angry about what happened, and rightfully so. But we got to make sure that we are presenting this in the right way. This is about getting justice for John and making sure that his story is told accurately. And I think that's got to be of the utmost importance right now.
It is. And again, the families met with the prosecutors and the detectives, and they're being kept in the loop, and they can call them if they ever have any questions or concerns.
Right. Chris Bowen said, why will police not uphold the child custody laws when there are laws in just about every state that make it a criminal and civil violation to violate a custody order? I might caveat right before you get into that, Kevin. I've interviewed sheriffs on here, and most of them have said, we are not trained to get involved in civil matters. So most of the time it sounds like they're told to stay out of civil matters. Yet at the same time, it is one of the number one calls that they get. Do you think that's where CPS really needs to step up? Is it a lack of training? Maybe you could touch on that.
I don't think it needs to. No, I don't think CPS needs to be involved in that. And I will tell you, law enforcement across the country will pretty much give the same answer that you just said. Clients will come to me and say, so-and-so took off with the children. I need to get a police officer to go out and get my kids. What's going to happen? And I always tell them it depends on the police officer you get. Will help you, but some won't. They do see it as a civil situation. Now you can get, in Arkansas, they're called writs of assistance from the judge that says, sheriff, go get the children and give them to Mr. Smith or whoever it is. But you've got to go through the whole court process to do that, and you shouldn't have to do that. Most states have criminal statutes that it is a crime if you violate the other person's visitation rights or if you violate the other parent's custody rights. Prosecutors will sometimes take those cases. It just depends on the case and the situation. But a lot of times there are situations where parents are left wanting.
All right, so this is one that we've been getting quite frequently. Joe DeCesaro said, where were the children when this happened?
I'm not going to answer that.
No. All right, guys. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get...
I'm sorry about that.
No. That's there's just some things we can't answer, guys. And that's I'm getting a lot of the. It's a lot of the questions are asking the same thing. Reading these. Anthony Conte said, Kevin, question, what should you do when you have proof of someone violating your rights, they proved it themselves, and you can show up conspiracy with the court officers and attorneys, and your state will do nothing?
Well, that's going more toward a civil rights kind of claim. If you have proof that it sounds like court officers, I'm assuming that's judges and whoever, are involved in some kind of conspiracy, you'd have to take that to either a civil rights attorney or a prosecutor.
This is one of John's friends. Heather Renee said, John spent well over $100,000. He worked his ass off to make the money to do what he needed. He did DoorDash, Uber, Lyft, every kind of side hustle he could do to make money. He did it. And I think that speaks to John's incredibility. I'm going to say this because it was one of the things that affected me the most. When I went to the visitation, I noticed the stains on John's hand and how rough they were, how hard he had been working. And that really sunk in with me. And talking to the family and them talking about how he was working 2 or 3 jobs, not just because of the money, but just to keep it off of his mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, he did. And he moved to Idaho. He had no plans to move to Idaho. He moved to Idaho to be closer to his children. And I mean, he would do anything for his kids.
Absolutely. James Ray said, any ramifications for her attorney for bringing the charges, knowing they were probably done as a stunt to win custody?
Well, I won't get into that. But I mean, you represent your client, and you take the evidence you're given and you present it, and you argue on behalf of your client. And I think I'll just kind of leave it there.
Nikki Ward said, is CPS supposed to automatically remove children from a home who were sexually abused? They left I'm not too sure what that means, in the home with the abuser, saying they like to keep siblings together. I'm
going to answer that as best I can. And CPS has investigators that go out, and they have I don't know if I'd call it a checklist. I've never seen the exact form that they use, but they have things they have to look for and triggers that they look for as to whether they should pull children out of a home or not. And a lot of that is a judgment call, but they have protocols for doing that. And again, every case is different.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of questions, guys, that, some of it are hypotheticals. Do you believe this? Do you believe that? Some of it we just, we can't get into. I wish we could answer some of this. I'll read this one to you, Kevin. Amber Leanne Flores said, did John ever express to you being in fear for his life? Did he have any idea this could possibly happen? Had he mentioned to you before his ex-wife being capable of taking his life? And
I'm not real comfortable answering that. No. Going back to what I said earlier, I think if he thought something like this was going to happen, he would have taken different precautions at that visitation exchange.
Yeah. Brandy Roar Johnson said, would a parenting class for high conflict custody battles be beneficial to try and curb alienation before it comes out of control? If it would be, how do we get this in front of the courts? I have a professional willing to help with this if it's a possibility.
I think it would be great. I would hope it would be effective. Litigation has a way, and just when a divorce case starts, it has a way of really agitating people. I'm in court all the time. It's what I do for my livelihood, but most people aren't. And it causes a lot of stress. It causes people many times to act ways that they normally wouldn't. It's just a very stressful thing to go through. And parenting class may be helpful. I know our local courts have courses that the parents take when the divorce is over about how to communicate with each other, don't say negative things in front of the children, and that kind of thing. And I think that can help. But it would be good if there was something at the beginning as the case is starting.
And I got some mixed reactions on that because I've been divorced twice, and I had to do those parenting classes. And then what they do is it's not with you and the parent that you divorce. You're usually in there with a group of people that just got through divorce, and you get in there talking about how you're so glad it's over and everything. And I think if they actually had a class where mom and dad had to sit down and find some way, you don't have to like each other. You don't even have to want to be around each other, but do what's best for your children, and you shouldn't have to have a class to tell you how to do that. Keep it about your children.
There was a judge on the bench a few years ago here locally. He's been retired for several years now, and I loved what he would say at the end of a case when he would give his final decision. He would tell the parents in court, "You two cared about each other at one point in your lives to have these children, and you've got to remember that you've got to keep it that way. And you may not get along with each other anymore, but you have got to get along in front of these children. They deserve to have as normal of a childhood as they can have." And I always thought that was great to tell them.
Scott McDowell had a great comment in here. He said, "I don't think anyone would have seen this coming. You never think threats will materialize." I think, that kind of talk probably sometimes is really common when it comes to these custody cases. And, John had been going through this for 3 years, 3 years. I mean, nobody could have seen.
I don't fault John one bit for how he set up that visitation exchange.
No, absolutely not. I guess getting back to what went on in that case, Kevin, is there any more information you could talk to John's credibility, some of the things that he went through trying to clear his name? I'm sure there's much more that went on in, the trials that he was involved in that we may not have touched on yet.
I don't want to get into too many specifics, but the children were both forensically interviewed, which happens a lot of times when there are abuse allegations. One of the children was interviewed, had 2 forensic interviews. And during one interview, there was, it was very iffy what was said, whether that would really be an abuse allegation. The other child that was forensically interviewed never disclosed anything, even though there were allegations out there that John had abused that child. That when that child was forensically interviewed, nothing was disclosed. We had 2 different experts testify at trial that pretty much tore apart the forensic interview of the child that did say something that was could possibly be construed as an allegation. And there were leading questions used in the interview. There was redirection of where the child had supposedly been touched. There were just a lot of mistakes made, and it was clear that interview was completely tainted.
Corey Ritter said, "Hi, Kevin. John mentioned that the family law court increased his conflict. Do you feel that is a problem in family court where attorneys and evaluators do not work to decrease conflict because it's not profitable, basically to increase litigation and billing?"
I know there's a perception out there that attorneys, you hear the phrases, attorneys are the only ones that win, attorneys are the only ones that are going to profit off this. And I guess there are attorneys out there that just do that. But the simple fact is a case like this is expensive, and it's going to be expensive if you have to get attorneys involved. The conflict part, I can't speak for other attorneys, but if we're going to have to be aggressive to go to court, then that's what we're going to do. But if we can settle a case, then that's what I'm going to try to do. And I always start a case hoping we can come to some kind of settlement sooner rather than later. But a lot of times when you're dealing with a case like this that's high conflict, it's just not going to happen. So I think it's just the nature of the beast that causes people to really have conflict.
Absolutely.
Once the litigation starts.
TBL ATL, he said, "Did John ever look at a defamation of character lawsuit to take things outside the realm of family court?"
I'm not going to get into that.
Right. Heather Hamilton said, "Do you believe in CPTSD or the long-term effects of parental alienation for children and the targeted parent?"
Yes, it definitely has long-term effects. And I don't know as far as studies how in depth, for years, decades down the road that you can show effects of it, but it absolutely has long-term effects.
Right.
The targeted parent is having to try to repair that relationship for years in many cases.
Right. I'm still getting a ton of questions, Kevin, that, again, guys, some of these things that you guys are asking, if you got specifics that you would like to know about John's case, what we could get out, let us know, and we will try to do it. And a lot of them's about the children
I can mention a little bit about the alienation. I don't know that we've talked a little bit around it.
That would be good.
This was as bad of an alienation case as you will get. It was terrible. And every time that something would start to go John's way, all of a sudden the children would act a different way at the next visitation, or mom would file something else. There was just a reaction every time John would start to get a foothold in the case. And it was just clear to me that was coming from an alienating parent, an alienating household. She lived with her parents. And it was just obvious. The visitations were at a visitation center, and they were supervised. And so the supervisors many times took notes. And I will say that the notes in this case from the supervisor were as detailed as I've ever seen. And some of the things the children were doing and saying were just absolutely awful to John. And I couldn't even hardly read it and imagine him having to sit there, but he would sit there and stay there. And they would make statements about, we were told to act this way, or well, we were told this, and that's why we don't like you. And there were a lot, I won't get into specifics, but lots and lots of that kind of behavior.
Well, and I think it's common too in these cases of parental alienation. The kids go 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years without seeing the non-custodial parent, and then once there is some type of custody one, they're sitting there saying, "Hey, they don't want to go with the non-custodial parent. They don't, they're doing everything in their power." Well, of course, they've been hearing one side of the story. They've been kept away from that parent. They obviously think there's some reason I haven't been able to see daddy. There's some reason I haven't been able to see mommy. And kids can be smart, and they feel that, and they think that loving that other parent or being with them somehow is going to harm them, or it's dangerous.
I couldn't have said it better. You're exactly right. So why? And we're adults. We can talk about and kind of see through these things. You're going to expect children to see through that. They can't discern that. They can't figure it out. So of course they're not going to want to go see that parent.
And I think that absence, that not being able to see them, it just makes it that much worse. And that's why there really needs to be some awareness with that with the courts, because you can't just judge based off of a child's reaction, because if they haven't been around mama or daddy, they're doing what's natural in their heart right now.
That's right. That's right.
Chris Bowen said, "Kevin, how do you feel about the current social narrative that cases like John's are just an isolated incident?"
Well, it doesn't happen very often, obviously, but when something like that happens, though, that's the ultimate tragic thing. I mean, these children don't have a father now, and yeah, it may be an isolated incident, but it happens. And if it's not killing someone, it's physical altercations. It's all kinds of negative, awful things. So it may be it may not happen very often that someone's actually killed, but it happens often. One time's too many.
Right. I mean, we just don't see it go to this extent that often. Is it isolated? No, it's not. Stuff like this happens, guys. I think one of the things when I spoke the other day that I was sitting there thinking about, one of the common phrases in the parental alienation community is parental alienation is like grieving the loss of a living child.
Yeah.
But
Very
as
good
I
one.
stood there the other day, all I could think of is like, here we are grieving the loss of one of our brothers. This is one of those where the tables was turned. A father that fought and did everything he could to prove his innocence. He fought for his children. He did everything that was asked for him. And this is how real it gets, guys. I'm still getting, again, guys, if you can give me specific questions about John's case, I think most of our questions that we're getting now are geared towards what happens next.
We'd love to be able to give answers to that. It's going to take time. And I think it's easy. I'm not going to tell you anything that hasn't been in the newspaper. I think it's easy to say this is all on video surveillance. The man confessed. And so, it's over. And it's just not that way. The prosecutors and detectives have work to do. I mean, they still have a lot of work to do. And even when you have a situation like that, it takes time, and you just, the answers just won't come that fast.
And again, I mean, I think it showed a lot about how John's family wants his story to bring about change in the community, because this is a very personal time for them, guys, and them coming out and speaking and doing the things that they're doing. And Kevin can tell you, his family was like a family that you would see in the movies. I didn't even know they made them like that anymore. You're talking about one of the nicest, sweetest families. I love his dad to death. John probably had one of the sweetest mothers I've ever met in my life.
Oh my gosh, yes. I wanted to bring her back home.
Exactly.
Sweetest family.
I mean, and just, it's going to take some time. Like Kevin said, that I know these are the questions that you guys are going to have. We're planning on documenting this along the way. So that will come. There will be answers to you guys' questions. But right now, I mean, this just happened a little over a week ago. So, I wish I had something I could say to you guys. It's just, looking back at John's story and how many different ways he proved his innocence. When he was exonerated back in May, how many times had he went before the court at that point in time, Kevin, and proved, his innocence in front of them?
Well, again, he had the polygraph and he had the psychosexual assessment, and the narrative was out there, and the other side played that narrative that John was an abuser, and it was easy to wave around that restraining order, but the full story was told a few months later in the temporary hearing when the video was played, and the judge actually got to see that video and said, "Well, there's no abuse here." And that cast doubt on everything else you've told me, Mom. And the temporary custody is going to Dad. But that, they wanted to conveniently forget that part of it, that it was really, that restraining order was pretty much gutted by that hearing.
So I'm going to try to frame this in the best way I can. I don't know if you can answer this or not, but I know with some allegations made against John, was there ever any video footage that showed otherwise?
No. None.
I mean, that proved that he didn't do what he was accused of.
You mean with the children?
No, with the ex.
Yes. Yeah. That incident with the restaurant, absolutely. The video is what exonerated him.
Exactly, and that's what I was getting back to. Can you walk us through that whole thing? I just wanted to make sure I wasn't going in an area that I wasn't supposed to go.
At the restraint, yeah, and I'll repeat that because that is super important. The restraining order hearing was in, I think, December of 2017, and John and his attorney were not able to get the video from the restaurant for that hearing. So John testified, this is not true, it did not happen. She testified, yes, it did, and the judge, what they many times do in protective orders, is erred on the side of caution and issued the restraining order. Well, months later, once the divorce started and they had a temporary, what they call an interim hearing in North Dakota, John and his attorney had obtained the video from the restaurant by that time, and it clearly showed that he did not do anything to her and that she had fabricated what happened.
That's right. You've got several questions from people that has asked, would you be an advocate of shared parenting with a rebuttable presumption?
Absolutely, and you have to be careful with that phrase, shared parenting. Every state is different. These are not federal laws, so every state crafts different custody provisions, and shared parenting usually means 50-50 time with parents. I'm completely fine with that, but I think you have to have some kind of rebuttable presumption there, because not every parent is a good parent, and not every parent, needs equal time. I mean, there are times when you need the court to review that and make a determination. But starting off on that foothold, is a lot of times good. And I'm going to speak for I've been doing this a long time, and a lot of judges, in fact, most judges, aren't real big on joint custody. And I'll tell you why. They feel like several months down the road, once the divorce is finished, that those parents, they're either going to start dating someone else, get married, whatever, life goes on, and they start to not get along as well. And they feel like these parties are coming right back to court months later. So they want someone to be a decision maker. Instead of just, we confer on all decisions, they want one parent to be a decision maker. So I don't know that the general public really understands that it's not that judges just don't want to do joint custody. There is some rationale there, and the biggest rationale I hear from judges is these people are going to be right back in front of me in 6 months, and I don't want to have to do that. So there is some rationale there.
And I think you was talking about you got to be careful with calling it shared parenting. There's other people that have said it too. I think there should be a law in John's name. I mean, we could definitely go. John could be the one that helps with change, and let's tell his story and let them know just how serious this gets. Because from somebody on the outside, even for me, Kevin, I didn't know what parental alienation was until I was going through it. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a cut and dry, everybody's going to, be right on board with shared parenting. They haven't heard the cases. They haven't heard the things that we know inside of this community. And you got to have these examples. John's case right now is a perfect example for anybody that doesn't know what we go through. Show them this, and it will tell them everything that they need to know. Thomas Higginbotham said, do you think it is fair for any parent to spend money to prove false allegations?
I'm not sure I really understand that.
I think that should be better phrased if it's proved that the custodial parent made up false allegations against the non-custodial parent knowingly. They knew that it was a false accusation. Should they be held accountable for the money that was spent to defend it?
There is a judge that is not, again, no longer on the bench, that I had a case, and we felt like there was some alienation going on, and at the temporary hearing, the judge, I was representing the father, and there were some false allegations out there that had still not been vetted, and the judge looked at my client and said, if it turns out that this happened, you're not going to see your kids very much. And then he turned to mom and he said, if it turns out, he goes, and he gave the research that I said earlier. He said, most of this, the time when a custody case starts and these allegations start coming out, and there's no history there, and all of a sudden there's allegations, most of the time those turn out to not be true. And if I find out you were coaching these children or in any way trying to create or fabricate false allegations, I will take these kids away from you. I think it's going to take judges having that kind of attitude, because it happens. And there should be repercussions of some kind. A lot of states are creating criminal statutes and already have criminal statutes on the books that make it a crime to bring up false allegations against another person.
Well, and I know it's not something that people like to get involved with politics, but do you think it's, a lot of these judges are older and they come from a different point of time, if you will.
Yeah.
And we got some of the newer judges. I've talked to some of the younger ones that are trying to get on the bench, and they seem to understand this so much more. Whereas some of these seem to be still in a different kind of mindset, a different era, if you will. Have you seen that when litigating these cases?
So it's been better the last several years. I think most judges are very receptive to listening to whatever you can present to them regarding the allegations. I think most of them are receptive and will have an open mind to review them objectively.
Absolutely. Jay Bright said, how's about a law that keeps the courts from rolling these cases on and on for years and years? I've seen some of these cases. One of my good friends, he's been in it for 11 years now. Is there a reason that you see these things? I mean, even like we was talking about with John, exonerated in May and didn't even get his time until a couple weeks ago when this happened.
Most judges, I think every state is pretty much the same, but most judges have, they have mandates from whatever agency oversees the judges for that state about pushing cases along and pushing their dockets along. And they have to fill out reports for the state and show what they're doing to push their dockets along. And I think most judges do that. You hear about these cases that go on for years. There's usually, again, there's 100 different reasons for that. But usually they have to have pretty justified reasons for it to go on that long.
Right. James Kelly said, "How do you feel about perjury being punishable by jail time?"
Well, I think it is, and I'm fine with it. I think every state has perjury laws.
Absolutely. Lily Black said, question for Kevin. A judge is one of the most difficult elected officials to obtain a meeting with. Do you have any suggestions on the best way to gain an audience with judges for the purpose of educating them about the issues? Haven't had much luck even as an organization director with Judicial Outreach Network Committee.
Attorneys have to have what's called CLE, continuing legal education. Judges also, I do not know how much they have to do each year, but they do go to judges' conferences. And I think they're presented a lot of information about these kinds of issues. So if you're wanting to, I think a one-on-one going to sit down with a judge would be a very hard thing to accomplish. But if you wanted to go speak to some judges at a conference on that issue, that might be the place to start.
Okay. When we're getting it, do John's parents have grandparents' rights? Does that come into play where he lives?
Idaho has a grandparent rights statute, yes, and I'll just kind of leave it at that.
All right. Let's see. Brandy said, how can we educate our judges in parental alienation? I asked because my attorney said most judges will not even acknowledge parental alienation.
Well, I'm not one to get caught up on word phrases like I use parental alienation. That's the word I use, and I know what I'm talking about when I talk about that. Different states have different names for it. The I can't remember. I think it's the ICD-9, whatever the medical reference book is going to start recognizing what we call parental alienation, but it's got a totally different name, and I that name escapes me right now. So it's recognized, and you have to almost not educate the judge, but just show what's going on. And most judges, I don't think, care so much if you call it parental alienation or whatever. If they see one parent trying to push another parent out of the children's lives, they're not going to like it. And if it's bad enough, they're going to do something about it. That's how I'd answer that.
And I think that's common, and I think that's a mistake for a lot of parents that are going inside the family courts. They get really hung up on wanting to make sure that they can prove it as parental alienation. I've heard of parental alienation, IPV, spousal abuse, silver bullet, false accusations. There's these different nicknames. Don't get caught up in proving a word. Prove the behaviors.
Right.
That's really what you got to do, guys. You got to prove the behaviors. Heck with whatever you want to call it. It's abuse is what it is. It's abuse to the children. And if you can show that pattern that's going on, don't worry so much about the titles. I mean, would you agree with that, Kevin?
I would agree with that, and I would also tell you every state is different, and every county really is different how they divide up cases. Some judges, all they do is domestic relations cases, divorces and custody and that kind of thing. If a judge has been hearing divorce and custody cases for very long, they've heard about alienation. I guarantee you, it comes up quite a bit.
Now, is that something that went down in John's case? Was he trying to prove parental alienation, or was you guys just trying to show the behaviors that was going on?
I used the words parental alienation, and I'm trying to remember back to when I first started speaking with Tom. I think he said North Dakota does call it that. I'm trying to remember, but we then, you just use that word, but then you've got to show the behaviors. You've got to show everything that was going on, what the children were saying at the visitation. What mom was doing every time something would go John's way in court, the reaction that would happen, taking off to Idaho, all of these things. It was just a whole pattern of behavior to try to get John out of these children's lives.
Now, what all problems did that cause with her leaving North Dakota and going to Idaho? What hoops did John have to go through, and what was that scenario like?
There is a federal law called the UCCJEA, and it says that children have to reside in a state for 6 months before you can have the case heard there. So she took the children from North Dakota, where they'd been living as a family with John, and went to Idaho and tried to file for divorce there. John had already, after she'd been served with the divorce papers on the North Dakota case that John had filed, she still filed in Idaho to try to get it there. The judges then confer on the phone, the Idaho judge and the North Dakota judge. And this would happen anywhere in the country if this situation played out. The judges get on the phone and talk about jurisdiction and where the case is going to be. And so it was decided that it would stay in North Dakota. Now, she filed for her first restraining order in Idaho during that time. And John had to go over there and defend that. So he had to drive all the way over there and go to court for that and get it dismissed. And then he came back for the temporary hearing in North Dakota and got custody. And I think I told you before, she filed 2 more restraining orders that we know of. Those were also dismissed. And then she filed for a 4th one on the day that John was killed, and that was also dismissed.
I know we was talking about earlier how hindsight is 20/20, and this has nothing to do with the meeting spot or what happened with the murder. But looking back at this and John's case and how it was litigated and everything, do you think there is anything that he could have done differently that would have went in his favor?
In his case?
Yep.
I've thought about that. I think Tom and I have thought about that. I will tell you, after those 2 days of trial in May, we kind of looked at each other and said we could not. In fact, we told John this. With these 2 days could not have gone any better for us. I thought we totally destroyed her the mom's credibility on the stand. She lied repeatedly. She made up a story about what one of the children told her, and then we showed she was lying by doing what's called impeaching her, showing her deposition testimony from months earlier, showing where she'd given a totally different statement. So I don't know what else we could have done. I mean, I was, we knew it was an uphill battle because the children had been with mom for so long at that point. And that's what I started my brief with in the custody part. I said, an alienating parent, one of the things they're trying to do is get the kids with them because they know the longer they're with them, the more allied with them they're going to be. and they know that a judge is going to have a harder time pulling them out of that situation and putting them with the other parent. And it had been so many months and years at that point that it was hard to undo all of that. And I think, this is total speculation by me, I think the judge just did not want to remove them from that home. I disagree with it, but I think they'd been there for so long that he just didn't want to change it.
What was this like emotionally for John? I mean, I know you got to speak with him a good bit during this. What was, if you could, I mean, kind of explain what feeling you was get with what emotions he was going through and how he was acting, taking all of this in at that point in time.
John's very stoic. He's very mild-mannered, but he was frustrated beyond belief, I guess would be the word I would use. And Tom and I mean, I'm kind of speaking for Tom, but I felt for John, and it was getting frustrating for us too, because we had the hearing in May, and all these months were going by with no decision, and we didn't really have any answers for him. This was an unprecedented thing for me. As I said earlier, I'd never had a case go this long without getting an order from the judge. And your client's turning to you for answers. He's completely frustrated and feels like here she goes again, getting away with everything. And we're somewhat powerless. We can't force the judge to make a decision. He finally did, but you feel kind of helpless because you don't have any answers for it.
Absolutely. Winford on YouTube said, "Sorry if I missed this, but after the divorce was finalized, what did John get in terms of custody?"
He had, the phrase that North Dakota uses escapes me, but essentially he had joint custody as far as decision making. So schooling and medical and that kind of thing. He had equal decision making authority with her. As far as time, the children were going to be with her most of the time, and he had unsupervised visitation that was to start in February, just a few days, several days ago.
There's people saying, I mean, is there any repercussions for the judges? I think that's kind of I don't know. I mean, what would you?
Judges have a lot of immunity from civils, and I'm talking in general terms, not about this judge. Judges have a lot of immunity from being sued. They can be sued, but it's nearly impossible. They have judicial conduct committees, just like attorneys do, that oversee their actions. So that's my answer, I guess.
Is there anything else, Kevin, do you think that we could say that could educate everybody a little bit as the story up until this point that we could divulge?
Not as far as what's going on now. As far as John's case, I think I've covered most of it. He was just a man that was dealing with a person that was going to divorce him, that had a plan, and I don't know what the phrase would be, but had a plan that was implemented very early on, and was not playing above the belt. And she took off with these kids, and he was behind the 8 ball from that point on, trying to play catch up, is the best way that I can say it.
Right. So guys, I'm sure there will be many more of these later on, and we will keep you updated. I mean, we're planning on going and documenting what happens from this point forward. I mean, we've gave you the case information the best we know how as of this moment, and just bear with us. These things don't solve themselves overnight, and this is, like I said, still a very fresh case. Any idea as to when people could expect to hear anything back from us, Kevin? Or
I don't. It's out of our hands. It's out of our hands. It could be a while, and I know it's hard to be patient, but I think everybody just needs to be patient.
Right. Kevin practices in Arkansas, guys. There's a few people asking how they can get a hold of you.
You can reach me. Our website is kevinhickeylaw.com. We have our primary office is in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and we also have another office in Rogers, Arkansas, which is northwest Arkansas. We take these, the high conflict custody cases, we take those all across the country. So we can take those in any state. There's a procedure that we go through where we associate with local counsel, because one of the questions that comes up is, are you licensed in every state? And no, but there's a procedure each state has to allow an out-of-state attorney to come in and work on a case, and that's what we do.
And they was asking if you do pro hac vice. I think that is what was going on in John's case.
That's the pro hac vice process, and that's what we did with in John's case.
Here's a question real quick from Steve Jankowski. He said, was there a GAL or parental alienation expert to review, make an assessment, and recommendations in John's case, recommendations about the alienation behavior of the mother?
We did have an expert, Dean Tong. I think he touched on that a little bit. There was on GAL, I'm assuming he means a guardian ad litem. There was a guardian ad litem in the juvenile case, but that person also testified in the divorce case and was very helpful for us, gave very good testimony about the fact that she did not use the words alienation, but it was clear that the parent that was willing to make it work was John and mom was not.
Right. All right, guys. We'll keep you updated as far as the documentary. We've been getting a bunch of questions about that. The real work starts now. We got amazing interviews over the past week. That's got to be edited down. That's where most of the time's going to go. We're looking at right now, it will be called I Stand With John, and we'll give you everything we know up until this point. There will probably be a second part that will be called Still Standing, The Trials of John Mast, that will show most of the questions that you guys are asking now, but that's not more than likely going to happen anytime soon. So that'll be something that we go on. And Kevin, me and him's been contacting several times a day. If there is something that we can update you guys with, we will.
Absolutely. And I want to mention something else too. The sexual abuse allegations that come out sometimes in high conflict custody cases, there is a name for that. It's called sexual abuse allegations in divorce, SAID, SAID. So if you have that going on in your case, or you want to know more about it, you can probably Google that phrase and you can find a lot of information on it.
Right. And again, just to touch on it, talking about that assessment again, I was told John scored one of the lowest scores they had ever seen.
Yeah, and if I've got a minute, I'll explain about that assessment.
Yes, sir, you do.
That is an almost all-day assessment. This is not going in and filling out a written form for 30 minutes and a computer spits out an answer. This is a professional, Dr. Ed Connor. He's a psychologist. He's one of the best in the country. I can't tell you how many psychosexual assessments he has performed. More than once, I have seen him on either 48 Hours or Dateline shows where he is testifying as an expert in trials. I mean, he's done it all. And he is the one that performed John's psychosexual assessment. And that assessment looks for many, many things. But the biggest thing in a case like John's is he prone to abuse somebody? Is he prone to sexually abuse children? Is he prone to sexually abuse children that are his children or someone else's children? All of those factors. And then finally, is he being deceptive? Is he lying about it? That he does really do this, but he's trying to lie on this test. All of those things were assessed, and John scored incredibly well on all of those things. He simply is not an abuser. He is not a sexual abuser. He is not a pedophile, and he was not deceptive in any way. He could not have been cleared more for those allegations.
I think that's the part that's really getting to a lot of us and people that knew John. I don't think you could have made a more unbelievable accusation against a guy that, you could just tell he was very mild-mannered, scored these loads. I mean, you couldn't have made an accusation that was more unbelievable, guys. I mean, you just really couldn't.
That
Unfortunately,
is absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct.
Unfortunately, those allegations, they have a high consequence. So we cannot let his memory, fade, man. We've got to get some laws changed, and I believe this is the case that will do it. I really do. So, but Kevin, man, I appreciate so much you coming on here and giving everybody an update. I mean, we've been getting these questions. This is went international. I've been getting reached out to from France, Australia, Canada, all over the globe. People are hearing about John's story and wanting to know what's going on. And I don't think that John would be one of those people that would want to have a spotlight on him. Again, very, very quiet person and didn't talk much, but he believed in this movement. He believed in what we fight for. So you guys get in here and let's make sure that we get this out there, because we can't have any more cases like this. We just can't.
And I think that's important what you just said, Eric. John was already starting to do things. He was trying to figure out how to talk to legislators. He was trying to figure out how to talk to local groups. He was not just ending with this case. He wanted reform because of everything he had gone through. He had seen what he felt and what was the injustice to him by what had happened, and he wanted to change it. He wanted to make real change, and I know that's what fuels you and me too.
Yeah. All right, brother.
All right.
I appreciate your friendship. It was so good to meet you. I wish it was under different circumstances, but guys, we'll keep you updated as things go along, and that's about the best we can tell you at this moment.
You just tell me where and when, and I'll be there, man.
All right, brother. I'm going to play that trailer for you guys one more time on our way out. I'll try to get this out to you soon. All right, take care, Kevin.
Hey, you too.
Today, and we talk about the struggles that fathers like John go through. We stand with the underdogs. We stand with the ones that are fighting to be in their family's life. And today we are here, standing beside our brother Tom. If I could say anything to those kids, I want you to know that your daddy loves you more than anything. And he fought for you. He fought for you so hard. We talk about how parental alienation, not being able to see your children, is like grieving the loss of a living child. And that's very true. There's a child here that you can have a relationship with, but you're not being allowed because of family law courts or profits that they want to make. But today there's another angle. We're here grieving the loss of one of our brothers.
Like he said in the letters, I'm fighting for you. He wanted so much to hold you, to hug you, to kiss you, to play with you, to love you. And he was denied that.
I can tell you this father fought with everything that he had. Everything. And we're not going to let his memory die. Would you stand with us for this moment of silence? As we stand with John.
We are going to do all we can to let them know how much their daddy loved them.
We stand with John.
Thank you for joining us tonight. We are fighting for the rights of parents worldwide. If you want to help support our podcast and for us to continue this mission, please join us at patreon.com/dadtalktoday. You will find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, CloutHub, Parler, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, the podcast app, Google, Apple Podcasts. We're a little bit of everywhere. And guys, every time you like and subscribe, you help us continue this mission. Thank you, and we will see you next time.